The airport had almost fallen silent by the time Flight 204 prepared for departure. The bright afternoon sun poured through the massive glass windows, painting long golden reflections across the polished floor. Airport staff hurried through their final checks while the last boarding announcement echoed across the nearly empty terminal. One exhausted father, carrying a worn backpack in one hand and holding his little daughter's tiny fingers in the other, hurried toward the gate with a face that carried years of sleepless nights and silent sacrifices. He believed this was simply another flight that would take him toward another uncertain chapter of life. He had no idea that before the plane reached the clouds, someone from a life he thought had disappeared forever would recognize him, not by his name, but by the military rank he had left behind years ago. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, sacrifice, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales so you never miss another heart-touching story. Caleb Warren had once been respected by everyone who wore the same uniform. Years earlier he had served as a decorated Army captain, leading dangerous rescue missions in places where hope often disappeared before sunrise. His calm decisions had saved countless lives, and younger soldiers admired the quiet confidence that never left him, even under impossible pressure. But medals could not protect a family from tragedy. After returning home from his final deployment, Caleb's wife, Nora, was diagnosed with a rare illness. Months of hospital visits drained every dollar they had saved, and despite every effort, she passed away, leaving Caleb alone with their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. Overnight the fearless officer became a grieving father who had to learn how to braid hair, pack school lunches, comfort nightmares, and hide his own tears behind reassuring smiles. He quietly resigned from the military because his daughter needed a father more than the country needed another officer. Life after the Army proved far more difficult than Caleb expected. Employers admired his service but rarely understood how military leadership translated into civilian work. Interview after interview ended with polite promises that never became phone calls. Bills piled up while savings disappeared. Caleb eventually accepted temporary warehouse jobs, delivery work, and construction shifts just to keep a roof over Sophie's head. Every evening he returned home exhausted, yet he still read bedtime stories with enough energy to make magical kingdoms come alive. Sophie never complained about their tiny apartment or the second-hand furniture because her father always made her feel rich in love, even when their bank account suggested otherwise. The invitation that finally changed everything came from an old veterans employment organization in another state. A logistics company was opening a leadership program specifically designed for former military officers. The salary was enough to give Sophie the stable future Caleb had dreamed about. They sold nearly everything they owned to afford the move, keeping only the essentials packed into 2 suitcases and a faded backpack that still carried Army patches Caleb had never found the courage to remove. Missing this flight would mean missing the interview that could transform their lives. Heavy traffic and a delayed train nearly ruined everything. By the time Caleb and Sophie reached the gate, boarding had already ended. Breathless and covered in sweat beneath the warm afternoon sun, Caleb pleaded with the gate staff for one final chance. After checking with the flight crew, they were allowed to board as the very last passengers. Embarrassed by the attention, Caleb quietly thanked everyone and led Sophie down the jet bridge, believing the hardest part of the day was finally behind them. The aircraft cabin had already settled into silence. Passengers glanced up briefly before returning to books and phones. Caleb secured their bags and helped Sophie buckle her seatbelt beside the window. As he finally leaned back, closing his eyes for the first time that day, the captain's voice came over the speaker with the routine welcome every traveler expected. But halfway through the announcement, the voice paused. A surprising warmth entered its tone before it spoke words that froze Caleb where he sat. The pilot welcomed everyone aboard, then added that before departure he wished to acknowledge the last passenger who had just boarded. He respectfully greeted Captain Caleb Warren, thanking him for a courageous act years earlier that had given another soldier a second chance at life. The entire cabin fell silent. Caleb slowly opened his eyes, convinced he had imagined the words. Instead, dozens of curious faces had turned toward him. Unknown to everyone on board except the captain, 12 years earlier Caleb had led a rescue operation after a military helicopter crashed deep inside a mountain valley. Despite dangerous weather and enemy fire, he refused to leave until every injured soldier had been recovered. One badly wounded young lieutenant survived only because Caleb carried him nearly 2 miles through freezing rain after medical evacuation became impossible. That lieutenant had eventually recovered, left the military, and fulfilled a lifelong dream of becoming an airline pilot. Today, that pilot was commanding Flight 204. The passengers erupted into heartfelt applause. Caleb lowered his head, overwhelmed by a recognition he had never expected. He had spent years believing his military service belonged to another lifetime, buried beneath overdue bills and lonely evenings. Yet one simple sentence from the cockpit reminded him that acts of courage never truly disappear. Sophie looked at her father with shining eyes filled with pride she had never fully understood until that moment. For the first time, she realized her quiet father had once been someone's hero. The flight continued peacefully beneath brilliant blue skies. During the journey, Caleb reflected on how easily people judged others by worn clothes or tired expressions without ever knowing the stories they carried. He remembered countless moments when strangers had looked at him with pity because he was a struggling single dad. None of them knew he had once commanded rescue missions or held frightened soldiers together with words of hope. Life had changed his circumstances, but it had never changed his character. After landing, passengers remained seated longer than usual. Many approached Caleb simply to shake his hand or thank him for his service. Parents introduced their children, hoping they would remember the meaning of sacrifice. Business travelers who had spent the flight buried in laptops now paused to express genuine respect. Sophie watched every conversation with growing admiration, realizing that true greatness was measured not by wealth or fame but by the lives someone quietly touched. Then the cockpit door opened. The captain walked down the aisle still wearing his uniform and stopped directly in front of Caleb. Emotion filled his face as he embraced the man who had once refused to leave him behind. He admitted that every successful landing, every family safely reunited, and every child who smiled while stepping off his aircraft was possible because one officer had chosen courage instead of convenience years ago. The reunion moved nearly everyone still standing inside the cabin. News of the remarkable reunion spread quickly after several passengers shared the story online. Within days, veterans organizations, employers, and community leaders reached out to Caleb. The logistics company conducting the interview had already heard what happened before he even arrived. They saw not only an experienced leader but a man whose integrity had inspired strangers across the country. Caleb received the position immediately, along with additional leadership responsibilities that reflected the trust they placed in him. The new beginning transformed more than their financial future. Sophie enrolled in a wonderful school where she made friends easily. Caleb finally found a home where laughter slowly replaced silence. Every evening, they sat together on the porch watching sunsets instead of worrying about unpaid bills. The army medals that had remained hidden inside an old box were finally displayed where Sophie could proudly see them. They no longer represented painful memories but reminders that doing the right thing always matters, even when no one seems to notice. As the seasons passed, Caleb volunteered with organizations helping veterans transition into civilian life. He encouraged struggling fathers never to measure themselves by temporary hardships. He reminded them that children remember love, patience, and presence far more than expensive gifts. His own journey became proof that life sometimes rewards quiet perseverance long after hope appears lost. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, leave a comment telling us what part inspired you most, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. Special request: before the story ends, please comment, "Heroes never stop being heroes," if you believe kindness and sacrifice always come back in unexpected ways. Caleb once believed he was simply the last passenger on Flight 204, another tired father trying to build a better future for his daughter. Instead, he discovered that the greatest titles are never printed on boarding passes or business cards. They are written forever in the hearts of people whose lives we choose to save, encourage, and never give up on. Sometimes the world forgets our sacrifices for a season, but true goodness has a remarkable way of finding its way home when we least expect it. And for one single father and one little girl, an ordinary afternoon flight became the beginning of the beautiful life they had waited so long to find.